What if everything you thought was spiritual growth was actually just another layer of confusion? What if the path you've been walking, filled with rituals, affirmations, meditation apps, and books, wasn't leading you into truth, but away from it? That's the twist no one wants to talk about, because the spiritual path has become a performance, a distraction, a beautifully disguised detour. And the most dangerous part? You can believe you're evolving while getting further and further away from yourself. That's why these 7 signs are not just red flags, they're spiritual wake-up calls. If you see them in your life, it's not a reason to panic, but it is a reason to pause everything. Because alignment isn't about doing more. It's about returning to what's real. We've all been there, chasing the next high, the next teaching, the next activation, thinking that if we just read one more book, attend one more retreat, get one more answer, we'll finally arrive. But have you noticed that the arriving never comes? That there's always one more block to release, one more shadow to heal, one more frequency to ascend to. That's not evolution, that's addiction. And it's the first sign your spiritual path might be misaligned. When healing becomes your identity, you stop being a living soul and start being a project. You become obsessed with fixing yourself, as if your wholeness is somewhere out of reach. But the real you, the true self, was never broken. Healing is not a lifestyle. It's a phase, a door, and at some point, you have to walk through it and start living. The second sign is subtle but deep. You judge others for not being conscious enough. You look at how people eat, speak, think, dress, and silently categorize them as asleep or awakened. You may not say it, but you feel it. That quiet superiority, that energetic distance. And you tell yourself it's discernment or awareness. But what if it's just ego in disguise? What if your spiritual path has become an identity you wear to feel safe, valuable, or ahead? Because real awakening humbles you. It softens you. It breaks your heart open to the point where you see yourself in everyone, not just the high-vibe people. The moment you start separating yourself in the name of consciousness, you've left the path. You're not evolving, you're performing. Now let's go deeper. The third sign is this: you use spiritual practices to avoid uncomfortable emotions. You feel anxiety, and instead of sitting in it, you grab your sage or crystals. You feel anger, and instead of expressing it, you meditate it away. You feel grief, and instead of letting it burn through you, you bypass it with gratitude journaling. Do you see the pattern? You're using spiritual tools as escape hatches. And while they're beautiful tools, they become toxic when used to numb reality. True spirituality doesn't protect you from emotion, it deepens your ability to feel.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
It holds space for the entire spectrum of human experience. If you're afraid of your own shadow, how can you stand in your full light? The fourth sign is this: you're spiritually exhausted, but you don't know why. You've been doing the work, sajing to mantras, following the moon phases, tracking your chart, clearing your energy, but you feel tired, disconnected, like something's missing. That's because your soul is craving simplicity, stillness, silence, but you're stuck in a spiritual hamster wheel, thinking activity equals alignment. It doesn't. In fact, the most aligned moments often come when you stop trying, when you surrender the toolbox and just breathe, just be. Think about it. Why do we complicate the path to something that's already within us? Why do we think the divine requires effort to access? Maybe the truth is, you don't need more information. You need integration. And here's a mirror you may not like looking into. The fifth sign is you're afraid to be seen as ordinary. You've built your identity around being spiritual, awakened, different. But underneath it all, there's a fear of being just human, flawed, messy, normal. So you hide behind esoteric language. You post only your most enlightened thoughts. You curate your image to reflect someone who's transcended the mundane. But the divine is in the mundane. Enlightenment isn't about escaping being human, it's about being fully human with presence, with honesty, with your feet in the dirt and your heart in the stars. If your path makes you fear vulnerability, it's not a path, it's a costume. And your soul didn't come here to perform. It came here to feel. The sixth sign is dangerous because it feels so noble. You sacrifice your needs in the name of being spiritual. You think boundaries are selfish. You think anger is unspiritual. You think choosing yourself is ego. So you accommodate, tolerate, and spiritualize your own suppression. You confuse peace with passivity. But let me ask you something deep. What if honoring your needs is the most sacred act of all? What if your no is more holy than your forced yes? Real alignment doesn't ask you to shrink. It asks you to stand. Not in rebellion, but in truth. And truth doesn't always look polite. Sometimes it's fierce. Sometimes it's disruptive. But it's always aligned. Finally, the seventh sign is the most heartbreaking. You've lost your capacity for wonder. Life used to feel enchanted, mysterious, alive. But now it all feels like a checklist. You've turned spirituality into a system. You've memorized the chakras, the archetypes, the astrology. But the mystery is gone. You've replaced awe with knowledge. Curiosity with certainty. And your soul is starving, because the highest frequency isn't mastery, it's wonder. It's waking up and seeing the sky as if for the first time. It's being moved by a stranger's smile. It's crying without knowing why. If your path has become a mental exercise instead of a heart opening, it's time to return, not to more concepts, but to aliveness, to the unknown, to the sacred simplicity of being here, now, without needing to understand it all. So I'll ask you a question most people are too afraid to ask. What if your spiritual practice is the very thing blocking your spiritual growth? What if the rituals, the books, the teachings were meant to point you home, but you mistook them for home itself? What if the most spiritual thing you could do today is nothing? You wouldn't think it's possible to be so deep into your spiritual journey, so awakened, so self-aware, so in tune with your chakras and timelines, and yet feel more lost than ever. But it's real. And it happens quietly, not in loud breakdowns or dramatic moments, but in subtle detachment, in a kind of emotional numbness that creeps in slowly, disguised as peace. You tell yourself you're calm, that you've found stillness, that you're above the chaos. But if you're honest, deeply honest, what you've actually lost is aliveness. You've drifted, not into darkness, but into absence, into spiritual sedation. And it's one of the most dangerous places to be because it feels like progress, but it's actually escape. The silent drift begins with good intentions. We want peace. We want meaning. We want to free ourselves from the patterns that trap us. So we start seeking. We meditate. We read. We align. We do the work. But somewhere along the way, we begin to replace presence with performance. We start to curate our internal world the same way we curate our social media, selectively, carefully, always trying to appear in control. We identify more with our spiritual image than our actual soul. And without realizing it, we disconnect. Not from others, but from ourselves. From the raw, messy, beautiful chaos that makes life real. You can feel it in those quiet moments, can't you? When the practices stop working, when the mantras feel hollow, when you sit down to meditate and all you feel is resistance, you think maybe you've slipped, maybe you're not trying hard enough. But the truth is, you don't need more effort. You need truth. You need to ask yourself the question no one wants to ask on the spiritual path. Am I actually here, or am I performing presence? Because there's a big difference between stillness and suppression, between peace and passivity, between transcendence and disconnection. Just because you're not reactive doesn't mean you're healed. Just because you've stopped feeling pain doesn't mean you're high vibe. Sometimes it means you've gone numb, that you've mistaken detachment for alignment, that you've built a spiritual identity so convincing it even fooled you. And now you're floating, not grounded, not rooted, just drifting. And here's where it gets deeper. When you disconnect from the rawness of your own humanity, you also disconnect from your intuition. You start relying on signs, on synchronicities, on angel numbers and tarot cards, not as guides, but as crutches. You stop trusting your gut and start outsourcing your knowing. You wait for external validation before making any move. And you tell yourself it's because you're aligned with divine timing. But sometimes it's not divine timing. Sometimes it's just fear dressed in spiritual language. Sometimes you're not waiting for the universe, you're just afraid to act without a cosmic permission slip. Let's call it out. The silent drift is spiritual stagnation disguised as spiritual maturity. It's when you've done so much inner work that you forget who you were before the work began. It's when you've spent so long trying to transcend your ego that you've lost contact with your basic human needs like joy, connection, and play. You've become so focused on healing your past lives, decoding your birth chart, and purging your energy field that you've stopped living. You've forgotten the point, because the point was never to become more spiritual. The point was to become more real. And realness is messy. It's contradictory. It's sometimes loud, sometimes quiet. It's laughing too hard, crying in public, saying the wrong thing, admitting you're still figuring it out. Realness isn't about being enlightened, it's about being here, fully. Awake not just to the divine, but to the everyday, to the smell of coffee in the morning, to the ache in your chest when someone you love walks away, to the awkwardness of growth and the magic of small, ordinary moments. So if you feel disconnected right now, if you feel like you've been walking this path but somehow ended up further from yourself, take that as a sacred invitation, not to do more, but to undo, to unravel the layers of spiritual identity you've built, to release the need to appear awakened, to stop performing enlightenment and just feel again, even if it's messy, especially if it's messy. Because you can't drift back into your soul. You have to dive. You have to return to your body, to your breath, to your truth. Not the truth someone posted in a carousel on Instagram. Your truth. The one that lives in your bones. The one that doesn't always sound wise or pretty, but is real. That's the compass. That's the medicine. That's the frequency that brings you home. So I'll ask you a question that only your soul can answer. When was the last time you felt completely, radically, unapologetically alive? Not aligned, not ascended, alive. Think about that moment. Feel it in your body. And ask yourself, am I living for more of that? Or am I living for an idea of what spirituality is supposed to look like? Because if you're feeling numb, lost, or stuck, that's not a failure. It's a flare, a sacred signal. Your soul isn't confused. It's just calling you back. And maybe the real journey begins the moment you stop trying to be spiritual and start remembering how to be you. There's a myth we've all been sold on the spiritual path, and it's this, that high vibes are the goal. That anything heavy, dark, uncomfortable, or painful must be avoided, transmuted, or vibrated away. That the ultimate sign of spiritual mastery is to always be in joy, gratitude, peace, love, and light. But let's stop and ask a deeper question. What if only chasing high vibrations is what's keeping us from actual freedom? What if the insistence on staying in the light is the very thing keeping us in spiritual bondage? You see, when we only allow ourselves to dwell in the realm of light, we create exile for the parts of us that are still in the dark. And what we exile doesn't disappear, it festers. It hides. It grows stronger in shadow. That's not healing. That's fragmentation. That's wearing a mask of light while your inner world quietly screams for integration. And here's the truth that so many spiritual circles avoid. The soul isn't just made of light. It's forged in contrast. It's birthed through shadow. It evolves through tension. You cannot ascend by bypassing what's beneath you. You rise by going deeper, not just higher. We've created this echo chamber of spiritual culture where low vibration emotions are frowned upon, where sadness is seen as a block, where anger is labeled as unhealed trauma, and where grief is something to clear away as fast as possible. But who decided that these emotions were lesser? Who decided that tears were a sign of regression? Who decided that rage couldn't be sacred? These ideas don't come from truth. They come from discomfort, from a collective inability to sit with pain. And so, in the name of spirituality, we shame the very experiences that are trying to liberate us. Think about it. How many times have you forced a smile when you were breaking inside because you didn't want to lower the vibration? How many times have you swallowed your truth because expressing it felt unspiritual? How many times have you judged yourself for feeling heavy, even though heaviness was the most honest thing in your body? That's not alignment. That's suppression. And suppression isn't just exhausting, it's dangerous. Because when you silence your shadow, it doesn't go away. It just finds other ways to speak through illness, depression, anxiety, numbness, and spiritual burnout. True alignment isn't about always being happy. It's about being whole. It's not about choosing light over darkness. It's about embracing the entire spectrum of your being. Because your soul didn't come here to be sanitized. It came here to be human, fully, authentically, messily. You're not here to ascend out of your humanity. You're here to awaken within it. And that means holding space for every part of you, not just the pretty parts, not just the healed parts, but the parts that still ache, still doubt, still rage, still grieve. This is where real transformation begins, not in bypassing the pain, but in meeting it, sitting with it, listening to it, asking it what it needs, what it's here to teach. Because every emotion is sacred, every shadow is a doorway. And when you learn to hold the darkness with the same reverence you hold the light, you stop being afraid of yourself. You stop running. You start integrating. And integration is what brings power. Not the power to control life, but the power to meet it, no matter what it brings. Let me ask you something most people never ask. Can you sit in your pain without trying to fix it? Can you be with your rage without making it wrong? Can you hold your heartbreak without rushing to heal it? Because if you can, you've found the portal to true freedom. Not the freedom of avoiding pain, but the freedom of no longer fearing it. That's the kind of peace that isn't shaken by circumstances. That's the kind of light that doesn't flicker when the storm comes. That's the kind of love that doesn't vanish when you feel unlovable. The spiritual trap of high vibes only is clever because it sounds so beautiful, but it's just another cage, another box. Another way we exile ourselves from the full truth of being alive. And if we want to be truly free, we have to break that box open. We have to stop worshipping light at the expense of depth. We have to stop treating uncomfortable emotions like viruses to be cured. And we have to start honoring them as holy messengers, each one carrying a piece of the puzzle back to our wholeness. You weren't born for constant bliss. You were born for truth. And the truth is, life is a dance of shadow and light, joy and sorrow, rage and stillness, love and loss. And your job isn't to pick a side. Your job is to stay in the dance, to stay in your body, to stay present even when it's uncomfortable, to love yourself not just when you're glowing, but when you're cracked open and raw, because that's where the real light lives, not in your aura, not in your affirmations, but in your willingness to feel it all. There comes a moment on every spiritual path where you have to stop. Not pause, stop. Stop searching. Stop fixing. Stop trying to become something more spiritual, more enlightened, more perfect. Because no matter how many techniques you master, how many teachers you follow, how many dimensions you think you've accessed, there's only one thing that truly matters. Are you living in alignment with your soul? Not your spiritual ego, not your curated identity. Your soul, the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are when no one's watching. The part of you that existed before the trauma, before the teachings, before the tools. The part that don't need a title or a ritual to be sacred. Realignment isn't something you achieve by doing more. In fact, it often begins by doing less, stripping away the noise, the constant input, the endless upgrades, the pressure to evolve faster, feel better, manifest bigger. Because that noise, even when covered in spiritual language, is still noise. And noise drowns out the whisper of the soul. The soul doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It doesn't care about how many followers you have or how many light codes you've downloaded. It speaks in stillness. It speaks in simplicity. And if your life is too loud, you won't hear it. You'll mistake motion for meaning. You'll confuse activity with alignment. You'll keep running in circles, chasing a version of yourself that doesn't even exist. So what does realignment look like? It looks like honesty, brutal, beautiful honesty. The kind that requires you to sit down, take a deep breath and ask, where have I abandoned myself in the name of being spiritual? Where have I silenced my truth to maintain peace? Where have I worn a mask of love while secretly resenting the weight I carry? Where have I sacrificed my joy to appear evolved? These questions are not comfortable, but they are clarifying. Because clarity is what the soul thrives on. Not complexity, not performance, just truth. Plain, raw, unfiltered truth. And sometimes that truth is ugly. Sometimes it reveals that the path you've been walking isn't yours at all, it's a borrowed map. A construct of someone else's awakening. A performance you inherited because it looked like wisdom. But your soul doesn't want a borrowed path. It wants you. It wants your voice, your rhythm, your way of loving, creating, expressing, resting, speaking, moving. And realignment means burning everything that doesn't feel true anymore, even if it once did. Even if it impresses people. Even if it earns you praise. Because a path that earns you applause but costs you your truth is not alignment, it's abandonment. So how do you return? You return by remembering, not learning, not achieving, remembering who you were before the noise. Who you are beneath the performance. What lights you up? What brings you peace? What feels like home in your own body? And you start small. You listen to your breath. You follow your curiosity. You honor your no as much as your yes. You stop trying to be good and start being real. Because realness is the frequency of the soul. And when you live in that frequency, life responds not to your words, but to your being. Everything begins to shift not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped resisting you. Ask yourself this and ask it with courage. If I stopped performing and started living, what would change? What would I let go of? What would I say no to? Who would I stop trying to please? What truth have I been swallowing that's ready to be spoken, trembling voice and all? Because you don't need more light. You need more truth. You don't need more tools. You need more self-trust. The path forward is not about becoming more spiritual. It's about becoming more you. Not the idea of you, the truth of you, the version of you that doesn't need to be healed to be whole. The one who is already aligned, just buried under layers of effort and expectation. So, let this be your invitation to return, not to a new path, but to the one you walked away from when you started doubting your own wisdom. The path of simplicity, of stillness, of soul. Strip it all back, burn the performance, Get quiet and listen. Your soul has been calling you home this whole time. And the moment you answer, everything begins again. But this time, it will be real.